The United Nations Security Council chamber is silent. The air is thick with tension. Diplomats from 15 nations sit behind there. Nameplates the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, and the 10 non-permanent members they have gathered once again to discuss. The war in Gaza, a conflict that has now raged for months. The Secretary General has pleaded for ceasefires. He has called for humanitarian pauses. He has warned of a deepening catastrophe. But here in this room, the center of global diplomacy, words seem to have lost their power. The American ambassador holds up a hand. He will veto the resolution, another resolution, this one, calling for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire. The Russian ambassador scowls. The French delegate shakes his head. The UK representative looks down at his notes. The vote is called. The result is predictable. Another failure. The meeting adjourns. The diplomats file out. Their faces grim. This scene has repeated itself over and over since the war began, each time a crucial vote is held. The permanent members of the Security Council cannot find consensus. The machinery of international peace and security is grinding to a halt, and the world is watching outside the UN headquarters in New York. Protesters gather. They hold signs that say, "Unirrelevant." They chant shame. Their voices are loud, but they are far from the bombed-out streets of Gaza City and Khan Younis, where a different reality is unfolding there. The sounds are of aerial bombardment, the deep thud of bunker-buster bombs, the whine of fighter jet engines, the crump of artillery. These are the sounds that define the conflict now, not the gavel in the Security Council. The question hangs in the air, a question that echoes in diplomatic cables and on news channels around the world. Has the war in Gaza made the United Nations irrelevant? To answer that, we must look at the history of the UN. Its founding purpose was to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. It was established in the ashes of World War I, to a promise that collective security would prevail over unilateral aggression. The Security Council was given the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. Its 5 permanent members, the victors of that war, were granted veto power and necessary compromise to ensure their participation, but that veto has often been a tool of paralysis. During the Cold War, it was used frequently by the US and the Soviet Union too. Bloc action in the Middle East. The veto created a frozen conflict, a stalemate that has lasted for decades. The current war in Gaza, however, feels different in its scale, its intensity, and the sheer speed of the humanitarian collapse it has exposed the UN's limitations in a new and stark way. The first and most obvious failure is the Security Council. For weeks after the initial Hamas attacks and the subsequent Israeli military operation, the Council could not pass a single resolution. Draft after draft was presented by various nations, some focused on condemning Hamas, others on protecting civilians. All were vetoed or failed to gain enough support. The US vetoed resolutions it deemed unbalanced or that did not affirm Israel's right to self-defense. China and Russia vetoed texts they argued gave Israel a green light for its campaign. The arguments were procedural, political, and deeply ideological. They were about the specific wording of a paragraph, the placement of a comma, while diplomats argued over semantics. The war continued. The death toll climbed, past 10,000, then 20,000, then 30,000. The majority women and children. Images of destroyed hospitals and starving children filled television screens, and the Security Council remained deadlocked. This inability to act on the most pressing crisis of our time has led many to declare the Council morally bankrupt, its credibility shattered beyond repair. But the UN is more than just the Security Council. There is the General Assembly, where every member state has one vote and no veto power here. Resolutions have been passed overwhelmingly, calling for humanitarian truces and ceasefires. But General Assembly resolutions are not binding. They are recommendations, expressions of the global will. They carry political weight, but no legal force. A country can ignore them without facing sanctions or military action, and that is precisely what has happened. The General Assembly speaks with a clear voice, but its words have not stopped the fighting. Then there's the office of the Secretary General. The current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has been perhaps the most vocal international figure, calling for a halt to the violence he invoked. Article 99 of the UN Charter, a rarely used power that allows him to bring any matter that he believes threatens international peace, and security to the attention of the Security Council. It was a dramatic move, a signal of the utmost urgency. He warned of a complete collapse of public order. He described the situation as a threat to the entire region. His intervention forced a vote, but it changed nothing. The U.S. still vetoed the subsequent resolution. The Secretary General's moral authority, his power of persuasion, proved insufficient against the hard realities of geopolitical interests. His frustration has been palpable in his public statements. He has looked tired, defeated. The tools at his disposal are simply not enough on the ground. In Gaza, the UN is represented by its relief agency, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. UNRWA is the backbone of humanitarian operations in Gaza. It runs schools, clinics, and food distribution centers. It provides a lifeline for millions of Palestinians, but UNRWA itself became a central player in the UN itself. When Israel alleged that a significant number of UNRWA staff were members of Hamas and other militant groups, and that some had even participated in the October 7th attacks, several major donor countries including the US and UK immediately suspended funding. The agency faced a financial and existential crisis. The allegations were serious, and they damaged the perceived neutrality of the UN in a war zone, the very organization tasked with providing aid was now under a cloud of suspicion, even as its workers continued to operate under bombardment, dying in airstrikes themselves. The controversy around UNRWA highlighted a deeper problem. The UN's agencies are often seen as partisan by one side or the other. Israel has long accused UNRWA of perpetuating the refugee problem and of allowing its facilities to be used by militants, Palestinians, and their supporters. See, the UN is a crucial protector, the only international body that recognizes their plight. This dual perception makes the UN a target it is caught in the crossfire not just of missiles, but of narratives. Its every action is scrutinized and criticized from all sides. Meanwhile, the international courts have become a new arena for this conflict. South Africa brought a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice accusing it of committing genocide in Gaza. The court issued provisional measures ordering Israel to prevent acts of genocide and to allow humanitarian aid to enter. The ICJ is the UN's principal judicial organ. Its rulings are legally binding, but the court has no police force, no army to enforce its decisions. Israel rejected the genocide accusation, and while it has to report on its compliance, the military operation continued. The ICJ's ruling was a landmark moment in international law, but on the ground in Gaza, its immediate impact was limited. It did not stop the war. It became another piece of paper, another judgment that failed to alter the reality of conflict. This is the core of the irrelevance argument. When bombs are falling and cities are being reduced to rubble, the UN's resolutions, court orders, and diplomatic appeals seem like abstractions they are disconnected from the brutal physics of war. The real power in this conflict lies with the nations that possess advanced air forces and precision-guided munitions. It lies with the pilots in their F-35 fighter jets, the operators of the Iron Dome, and the commanders of drone squadrons. The battle is decided in the skies over Gaza, not in the conference rooms of New York. The UN was designed for a different world, a world of conventional state-to-state wars. It struggles to cope with asymmetric conflicts with non-state actors like Hamas, with urban warfare fought in dense civilian areas its rules were written in 1945, and the war in Gaza is a 21st century conflict that shows no respect for those old rules. So is the UN irrelevant? The answer is not simple. It is a spectrum. On one end, for those living through the hell of Gaza, the UN might indeed seem irrelevant. Its blue flag offers little protection from a 500-pound bomb. Its food trucks are often unable to reach the hungry. Its calls for peace are drowned out by the roar of jet engines. The Security Council's paralysis is a stark symbol of a broken system. But on the other end, the UN remains the only truly global forum. It is the place where the small nations of the world can have their voices heard, where the selective outrage of the global south can be expressed. The General Assembly votes show that a vast majority of the world disagrees with the way this war is being conducted. The UN provides the infrastructure for humanitarian aid. Without UNRWA and other agencies, the situation in Gaza would be far, far worse. It is the platform for the legal challenges at the ICJ, which may have long-term consequences for how wars are fought, the UN is not irrelevant. But it has been severely weakened its authority, eroded by the very nations that created it. The war in Gaza has not made the UN irrelevant. It has revealed that it was already becoming so. This conflict has acted as a stress test, and the system has failed the foundations of the post-World War. The order are shaking and no one is sure what will be left standing when the dust finally settles in Gaza. The world will look different, and the role of the United Nations will need to be redefined in that new reality. The smoke over Gaza begins to thin, but the political landscape is forever changed. The question of the United Nations' relevance is no longer an academic debate. It is a live issue with profound implications for future conflicts around the world if the UN cannot function. In a crisis of this magnitude, then what is its purpose to understand the future? We must look at the immediate aftermath and the shifting global alliances. The war in Gaza did not happen in a vacuum. It is part of a broader realignment of world power, a move away from the US-led unipolar moment towards a more fragmented multipolar system, and the UN's failure to manage the Gaza crisis is a symptom of this larger decay. For decades, the United States was the undisputed leader of the international order. It was the primary architect of the UN and its most powerful patron. American power and diplomacy often provided the impetus for the Security Council to act. But in this conflict, the U.S. role has been fundamentally different. It has been a direct participant, providing unwavering political support and a continuous flow of military aid to Israel, including advanced fighter jets and precision bombs. At the Security Council, it has used its veto not to facilitate action, but to prevent it. This has created a crisis of legitimacy for the entire institution when the chief guarantor of the system acts in a way that many perceive as a veto out, undermining its core principles. The system itself cracks. The American veto is not seen as a legitimate use of power by much of the world, but as an obstruction of justice. This perception fuels anti-American sentiment and weakens the global standing of the UN. Simultaneously, other powers are stepping into the void. China and Russia have been quick to criticize the US and Israel. They position themselves as defenders of international law and the Palestinian cause. They call for ceasefires and peace conferences, but their motives are also strategic. They see an opportunity to challenge American influence and to win favor in the Arab and Muslim world. They are not necessarily offering a better, more functional alternative. They are exploiting the crisis to advance their own great power ambitions. The UN becomes a chessboard in this new Cold War, and the people of Gaza are the pawns this great power. Competition renders the Security Council even more ineffective. The trust between the permanent members is gone. The room for cooperation has evaporated. The Council is not just deadlocked, it is broken. The Middle East itself is changing. The traditional Arab powers like Saudi Arabia and Egypt are frustrated with the lack of progress. They are pursuing their own security arrangements. In diplomatic initiatives outside the UN framework, the Abraham Accords signaled a move towards bilateral deals between Arab states and Israel. Bypassing the long-stalled multilateral peace process, the war in Gaza has complicated this trend, but it has not reversed it. Nations are learning that they cannot rely on the UN for their security. They must look inward, and to regional partnerships. This trend towards regionalism is another nail in the coffin for the UN's centralized authority. Then there is the court of public opinion, especially among younger generations globally. For them, the UN is not just irrelevant, it is complicit. Its failure to stop the war, its perceived double standards, its bureaucracy, all contribute to a deep cynicism about international institutions. Social media is filled with accusations that the UN is a talking shop, a puppet of the powerful. This erosion of trust is perhaps the most dangerous long-term consequence. A world that does not believe in the possibility of collective security is a world that is more likely to resort to force. The war in Gaza has also demonstrated the growing importance of non-state actors in shaping global outcomes. Hamas, a militant group not a state actor, triggered a major regional conflict and has withstood the military might of a nation-state for months. Other non-state actors like the Houthis in Yemen have entered the fray, disrupting global shipping. In the Red Sea, with missile and drone attacks, the UN Charter was written for a world of states. It has no effective mechanism for dealing with these groups. This mismatch between the tools of the UN and the nature of modern conflict is a fundamental weakness. So what comes next? The United Nations will not disappear, its buildings will remain, its agencies will continue their work, but its role will diminish. It will become more of a humanitarian coordinator and a venue for dialogue, less an enforcer of peace and security. The concept of responsibility to protect R2P, the idea that the international community has a duty to intervene when a state fails to protect its own population from mass atrocities, has been a casualty of this war. R2P was already damaged by the aftermath of the Libya intervention in 2011, but Gaza has likely killed it. No major power is going to
advocate for a military intervention to protect
Palestinians. The political will is non-existent. The risks are too high. The precedent is too dangerous. The future of conflict resolution may lie elsewhere, in more ad hoc coalitions in regional organizations like the African Union, or in economic power being wielded by blocs like the European Union. We may see a return to spheres of influence where great powers manage conflicts within their own domains, rather than through a global body. This is a more unstable, more unpredictable world. It is a world where the rules are unclear, and where might often makes right for our channel Skies of Conflict. This has direct implications. The analysis of air power becomes even more critical in a world with a weakened UN. Nations will rely more on their own military capabilities for deterrence and for coercion. The fighter jet, the bomber, the missile, these are the instruments of sovereignty in a lawless international environment. The development of next-generation air power, from sixth-generation fighter programs to hypersonic missiles and AI-driven drone swarms, will accelerate because in the absence of a reliable global policeman, every country feels the need to be its own sheriff. The war in Gaza has shown that air power can dictate the tempo and destructiveness of a conflict, but it cannot on its own impose a political solution. That is the ultimate tragedy. The UN was supposed to provide that political solution. It was the forum where diplomacy could triumph over violence. Its failure in Gaza means that for the foreseeable future, violence will remain the primary arbiter of disputes in the Middle East, and beyond. The skies over conflict zones will not be patrolled by unpeacekeepers, but by the fighter jets of competing nations, their contrails tracing the new lines of a divided and dangerous world. The United Nations was born from the ashes of a world war. Its relevance was predicated on the world's collective memory of that horror. With the passing of that generation and the failure to prevent new horrors, the memory fades, and with it, the power of the institution. The war in Gaza may be remembered not just for its terrible human cost, but as the moment the world finally moved beyond the UN and into an uncharted and perilous future.